Welcome back to History with Liam, where a real historian guides you through parts of history you might have not heard about before. Today we're exploring the history of Guy Fawkes Night, also sometimes called Bonfire Night. Every year, on November the 5th, the skies of Britain erupt with fireworks and the glow of bonfires. Children wave sparklers, effigies known as guys are set alight, and in towns and villages, communities gather to celebrate a tradition more than 4 centuries old. But beneath the event lies a deeply political and religious history. Guy Fawkes Night began as a solemn act of thanksgiving for the deliverance of King James I from an audacious Catholic plot to blow up Parliament. Over time, it became a ritual of anti-Catholic sentiment, a symbol of English Protestant identity, and eventually a curious blend of political memory, folklore, and entertainment. This video will explore the whole history: the religious turmoil that led to the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, the fate of its conspirators, and the evolution of the commemorations that followed. We'll trace how Guy Fawkes, a relatively minor figure in the actual conspiracy, became a lasting symbol, from hated traitor to folk anti-hero, and how Bonfire Night itself transformed from a state-mandated religious observance into a secular night of festivity. To understand the origins of Guy Fawkes Night, we must first step back into the late 16th century, a time of religious division, political anxiety, and deep mistrust. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, England was still recovering from the startling religious changes of her predecessors. Her father, Henry VIII, had broken from Rome and established the Church of England. Her half-sister Mary I, a devout Catholic, had briefly restored papal authority, persecuting Protestants in the process. Elizabeth sought a middle way, a settlement that would stabilise the realm. But the Elizabethan religious settlement, while effective politically, satisfied few theologically. For English Catholics, the Elizabethan regime meant suppression. Catholic worship was outlawed, priests were exiled or executed, and heavy fines were imposed on recusants, those who refused to attend Anglican services. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, to be an openly practicing Catholic in England was to live under suspicion, surveillance, and often in secret. Yet even as the Queen's government sought to crush Catholic resistance, hope flickered amongst English Catholics. When Elizabeth died in 1603 without an heir, her successor, James VI of Scotland, ascended the English throne as James I. James was the son of the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, and many English Catholics believed his reign would bring relief to their problems. They hoped, perhaps naively, for toleration or even the restoration of their faith's public practice. Their hopes, however, were soon dashed. James, though personally ambivalent about theology, was politically pragmatic. He saw religious uniformity as essential to national unity. Within 2 years of coming to the throne, the enforcement of anti-Catholic laws resumed with renewed vigour. Mass was forbidden, harsh fines were reimposed, and priests were hunted down. The dream of Catholic toleration was dead. Out of this climate of frustration, betrayal, and desperation, the Gunpowder Plot was born. The Gunpowder Plot was not the first attempt by English Catholics to alter the course of their nation's religious policy, but it would quickly become the most infamous. Its leader was Robert Catesby, a charismatic and passionate Catholic gentleman from Warwickshire. Catesby was disillusioned by James's betrayal and convinced that peaceful appeals would never bring freedom of worship. He believed that only a dramatic act could awaken England to the Catholic cause. His plan was bold and catastrophic. The conspirators would blow up the Houses of Parliament during the state opening on November the 5th, 1605. In one explosion, they hoped to kill the king, the royal family, the lords, and the commons, effectively decapitating the English government. In the ensuing chaos, they would then seize control, proclaim James's young daughter, Princess Elizabeth, as a Catholic monarch, and restore the old faith. To accomplish this, Catesby gathered around him a small circle of like-minded men, among them Guy Fawkes. Fawkes, unlike many of the others, was not a gentleman of leisure, but a professional soldier. Born in York in 1570, he had fought for Catholic Spain against Protestant Dutch forces in the Netherlands. His experience with explosives and siege warfare made him invaluable to the plot. He was recruited to oversee the gunpowder and to ignite the fuse on the fateful day. The conspirators rented a cellar directly beneath the House of Lords and secretly filled it with 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to level the building and much of Westminster. The stage was set, but as the day of the opening approached, doubts began to emerge within their circle. Some conspirators feared that innocent Catholics, members of Parliament who were sympathetic to their faith, might perish in the blast. An anonymous letter was sent to Lord Monteagle, warning him to stay away from Parliament on November the 5th. The letter was shown to the authorities, and a search of the cellars was ordered. In the early hours of that morning, the guards discovered Guy Fawkes lurking near the barrels. He was arrested on the spot. Under torture, permitted by King James himself, Fawkes eventually revealed the names of his co-conspirators. Over the following weeks, the plot unravelled. Some conspirators fled and were killed in shootouts. Others were captured, tried, and sentenced to the gruesome death reserved for traitors, being hung, drawn, and quartered. Fawkes met his fate on January 31st, 1606. Weakened by torture, he managed to leap from the gallows and break his neck before the executioner could begin his work. The government of James I wasted no time in turning the failed plot to its advantage. The king had been delivered from certain death, and this deliverance, he proclaimed, was the work of divine providence. On January 21st, 1606, Parliament passed the Observance of the 5th of November Act, often called the Thanksgiving Act. It declared that every year the day should be solemnly kept to give thanks for the joyful day of deliverance. Attendance at special church services was made mandatory, and ministers were required to read an official prayer of thanksgiving. The first commemorations were held that very November. Across England, bonfires were lit in celebration, both as symbols of divine light and as instruments of public joy. Over time, the burning of effigies, often representing the Pope or traitors, became common. These bonfires gave the day its popular name, Bonfire Night. But behind the official Thanksgiving laid a darker motive. The Gunpowder Plot was not only a political crime, it was, in the public imagination, a Catholic one. The annual commemoration became a tool of Protestant triumphalism, reinforcing anti-Catholic sentiment and uniting the English under the banner of their Protestant monarchy. In sermons, pamphlets, and plays, the plotters were depicted as agents of papal tyranny and foreign intrigue. The message was clear. Protestant England had been saved from Catholic destruction by the hand of God. For over a century, Guy Fawkes Night was as much about condemnation as it was celebration. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, the 5th of November became a key date in the English Protestant calendar, a ritual reaffirmation of loyalty to the crown and hostility towards Rome. In many towns, effigies of the Pope were paraded through the streets and burned alongside those of Guy Fawkes. The celebrations grew increasingly rowdy, blending religious zeal with carnival mischief. Drunken revellers chanted "Down with Popery" as bonfires lit the night sky. Even as official enthusiasm for religious persecution waned, popular anti-Catholicism remained deeply ingrained in England. The day's ceremonies became a form of political theatre, an assertion of national identity in a world where England's Protestant distinctiveness was a point of pride. In the 18th century, amid wars with Catholic France and Spain, Bonfire Night served as a morale-building spectacle of patriotism. Ironically, by this point, Guy Fawkes himself had begun to eclipse the other conspirators in the public imagination. While the Thanksgiving Act had never named him as the plot's leader, his dramatic capture and defiance under torture made him the most memorable figure. Effigies of the Guy began to replace those of the Pope, and his name became synonymous with the entire event. Children, eager to join in the festivities, made straw guys and carried them through the streets, calling "penny for the Guy." The money they collected went towards buying fireworks, another symbol of the explosion that never happened. By the 19th century, Britain had changed profoundly. The old religious divisions had begun to soften. The Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829 allowed Catholics to sit in Parliament and restored many of their civil rights. Yet Bonfire Night persisted, transformed from a Protestant ritual into a broader celebration. Victorian observers noted that the day's meaning was shifting. The religious overtones faded somewhat, replaced by an emphasis on community gathering and spectacle. Firework displays, torchlit processions, and fairs became central features. The Guy, once a symbol of treason and heresy, was now a playful figure, even a target of children's humour. Still, the undercurrent of rebellion never entirely disappeared. In some areas, Bonfire Night remained an occasion for popular protest, a chance for ordinary people to vent frustrations against authority. In Lewes, Sussex, the tradition of bonfire societies grew, each with its own costumes, processions, and effigy burnings, sometimes political figures, not just Guy Fawkes. To this day, the Lewes celebrations are among the largest and most dramatic in Britain. By the late 19th century, Bonfire Night had become a national folk holiday, halfway between political commemoration and rural festivity. The act that originally mandated its observance was repealed in 1859, but the custom endured regardless. One of the most remarkable transformations in British cultural memory is that of Guy Fawkes himself. Once reviled as the embodiment of treason and fanaticism, he gradually became a figure of fascination, even admiration. This shift reflects a broader change in how society views rebellion and authority. In the 17th century, Fawkes was the ultimate villain, a cautionary tale of religious extremism. By the 19th century, however, Romanticism and popular storytelling had begun to reframe him as a tragic idealist, misguided perhaps, but courageous in his convictions. In literature and popular culture, Fawkes appeared as a man driven by conscience against tyranny. Historical novels and plays began to humanise him, emphasising his bravery and suffering rather than his crime. The phrase "a real guy" entered the English language, meaning an odd or comical fellow, but the undertone of individuality remained. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Fawkes' image underwent a further transformation. The Guy Fawkes mask, popularised by the graphic novel V for Vendetta, and later adopted by protest movements like Anonymous, reimagined him as a universal symbol of resistance against oppression. What began as a story of failed regicide became, paradoxically, a symbol of defiance, proof that even in failure, rebellion can inspire. Today, Guy Fawkes Night remains one of Britain's most distinctive traditions, though its religious and political origins have largely faded from public consciousness. So as the flames rise on the 5th of November, it is worth pausing to remember not just the rhyme, but the reasons behind it. Remember the 5th of November, Gunpowder, Treason and Plot. The story of Guy Fawkes Night is not merely one of treason and punishment. It is the story of a nation's struggle with religious belief, and a story of how intolerance and radicalism are contested in popular memory. Despite shifts in meaning, Bonfire Night endures as a living connection to the past, one of the few festivals that unites political history, religious memory, and popular custom. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for more History with Liam.